I, Enoch, saw the heavens open and the lights descend, lights that were not of the sun nor of the moon. It was the moment the star children set foot on earth, a time when fear was yet unknown to it. They brought with them secrets from other worlds and awakened ambition in the heart of humankind. From their union with us, the giants were born. And in my visions, I witnessed the wrath of the waters pour upon all creation. From a world you can only dream of, I will share the extraordinary life I bore witness to. Long before the great deluge covered the earth, humans lived in peace. Simple villages nestled in the shadow of ancient trees and beneath the boundless sky. Life was basic, pristine, holding the purity of the world's first breath. Creatures had not yet learned to fear men, and the gentle river answered prayers with clean water. Yet, soon after, the balance between heaven and earth was broken. From the celestial realm, unknown beings descended. Their initial purpose was to guide humanity, to observe without direct intervention. But then, they became captivated by the beauty of the human women, abandoned their original mission, and from that union, the giants were born. In those days I, Enoch, was an old man. My life passed in deep contemplation. That morning, I sat on a great rock in the valley, my gaze fixed on the horizon. The earth was writhing in pain. Something had fractured, and I felt it clearly in my chest. My son, Methuselah, trusted my intuition and understood my silence. I sensed his growing unease as the air became heavier. Though my heart anticipated danger, I decided not to alarm the villagers yet. I only instructed Methuselah to share with anyone willing to listen the importance of unity and vigilance. Nama was a maiden whose courage was admired by all. Her voice was steady as the winter wind, and it was rumored that when she touched the water, the eddies would grow silent. She warned us that the river waters had grown murky. I sensed her anxiety, for it resonated with my own worry. The earth was manifesting its sorrow in many ways. A few neighbors said they felt slight tremors, as if the earth were stirring from a long sleep. But I knew this was more than a gentle awakening. I had just stepped into my tent when a sudden roar shook the ground. The earth trembled beneath my feet, and my heart began to pound wildly. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to send the whole village into panic. Amidst the chaos, Noah appeared, a child of my own blood. He sought comfort, shaken by the recent tremor. I reassured him, saying it could just be a sign that the earth needed care. Deep down, however, I knew that this was just the beginning. Soon after, the initial fear gave way to a brief relief. There was no visible damage to the huts. Yet, the unease in the faces of those who knew me only deepened. I sensed with certainty that this tremor was the omen of something worrisome. Though I could not name it, something within me cried out that life would never be the same. Far from my village, Mount Hermon stood tall, a high land untouched by men. There resided the beings who had descended from the heavens in those long-forgotten days. Those who had briefly glimpsed them swore they had pale, smooth skin, with bodies that bore both strength and grace. Their faces resembled those of men, yet there was something distinct, an ethereal beauty that seemed to come from another realm. Among those who descended from the heavens were Semyaza and Azazel, who watched every step of humanity from above. Semyaza confessed to Azazel that the human women had stirred in him a strange longing. Though they were not of his world, they carried a light that attracted his very soul. Azazel was unsettled by the words, but curiosity also awoke within him. He knew they had to be cautious, for humans were still primitive beings, and their task was only to watch over them. But Semyaza was tired of silently observing through countless ages. He had witnessed too much human suffering and wondered if they should intervene to lighten their burden. Azazel contemplated the idea of sharing transformative knowledge with humanity, though he understood that it was not the mere knowledge that made them worthy, but what they chose to do with it. Both knew that by taking this step, they would cross boundaries that had never been touched. They themselves would be changed forever, and the world of man would change with them. A silent oath began to form, marking the rupture of the established order. The laws they followed forbade any direct intervention. To act would be to fracture the delicate structure of balance. Just then, a slight tremor ran through the earth, like an ancient sigh, as if the world itself was remembering that a forgotten rule was about to be broken. Azazel felt clearly that the earth was attempting to warn them. Semyaza, however, took the tremor as a sign that perhaps the human world was ready for what was coming. Both stood in silence, as if time had paused. In that moment, an invisible thing began to take shape. In the following days, the villagers attempted to return to their normal, peaceful rhythm. While the women cared for the children, the men led their herds to graze on the quiet meadows. Yet, beneath the surface of that peace, an unsaid but deeply felt anxiety permeated the air. Everyone sought reassurance in my eyes, an assurance I did not have. Nama's gaze, once full of joy, now carried a faint shadow of worry. She told me that some neighbors had noticed game was becoming scarce, and birds seemed to avoid the river. She wondered if they were fleeing from something. I, contemplative, replied that nature was wise and was trying to tell us something, that we needed to maintain vigilance. As the days passed, I began to lose my peace at night. Faint visions surrounded me. Tall, silent shapes watching me from a place I could not name. One evening, seeking stillness and clarity, I walked toward the edge of the village. Just as I walked, something stopped me. There, on the path between the trees, was a creature I had never seen before. Immediately, I felt this encounter was not random. The creature seemed to be waiting for me. I spoke softly to it, asking it where it came from and why it was there. Curious about its gaze, I looked up and felt my heart beat faster. On a high rock in the distance, bathed in the last light of the day, stood a tall and majestic figure. Its posture was straight and noble, emanating a composure beyond the reach of humanity. It watched me, still as stone. Even from afar, I could clearly perceive its strange, ethereal beauty. A shiver ran down my body. Could it be one of the beings the ancient stories spoke of? I whispered to myself, with a certainty in my bones, that something great and unknown was about to descend from those ancient mountains. I knew then that the village would continue to exist, but it would never be the same. I felt an invisible force beginning to lead me. That encounter marked the beginning of my spiritual awakening. Everything was foretold. The Watchers knew well that the path they had chosen would transform our world and all who lived in it. The sky grew heavy with dark clouds, as if a higher power sought to warn them not to proceed with their plan. With determined eyes, they descended the slopes of Mount Hermon, fully aware that they were crossing a boundary from which there was no return. What they were about to do broke their own laws and would forever disrupt the balance that had existed since the beginning of creation. They had decided to live among men. Semyaza calmly watched the glowing orbs that silently drifted above them. He tasked them with carefully monitoring our world, marking safe paths, secret shelters, and unseen dangers. Then, he remembered his homeland and spoke with longing of the crystalline waters of Ashtara, illuminated by 3 moons at night. Azazel agreed, but commented that our world was different. Here, creatures suffered, unable to move forward in the harmony that El Elyor granted to his dwelling place. Semyaza, nodding gently, recalled that El Elyor had entrusted them with the task of guarding the young and fragile worlds, not through force, but by silently watching their development. Just then, one of the glowing orbs detected an anomaly, a human whose nature was not in tune with the rest. Something in that soul defied the natural order of creation. Curious, Azazel asked what type of human could capture the attention of an Orhalim, being of light. Meanwhile, Semyaza and Azazel moved steadily between the trees, guided by the gentle moonlight. They sensed the forest watching them in awe, as if this corner of the world had never witnessed such a presence before. It was at that moment that Semyaza's gaze stopped on a human figure slowly walking toward the outskirts of the village. What struck him was the firmness in her step and the unusual serenity that surrounded her. He then understood. Inside her burned the hidden flame that El Elyor had placed in human nature when the earth was young and unnamed. An irresistible attraction stirred within him. Semyaza knew that approaching this human meant violating an ancient law, but he could not stop himself. Nama felt a shiver as she glimpsed the figures of the Watchers. Something inside warned her that they were not of this earth. Were they wandering spirits, or perhaps the ancient dwellers of the heavens mentioned in legends? Her heart quickened, and she directly asked about their origin, aware that their presence was unsettling the very air around them. Semyaza remained silent, answering her question with an unreadable gaze. The fracture was complete. They would no longer observe from afar, for they had fully descended to walk the path of man. The sun, one of the countless lights scattered throughout creation, witnessed something unprecedented since the first days. As it rose, its golden rays gently swept over the roofs of our village. The news spread quickly. No one could remember seeing anything like it. Although the beings possessed a beauty beyond human measure, they also carried a mystery that no one could name. The Watchers believed that I, an old man among humanity, carried a soul that was both awakened and rare. Perhaps, if the heavens allowed, I could open the path between the earthly and the eternal. Semyaza appeared before me with Azazel at his side. They told me they had come from distant lands to share unknown knowledge with us. Calmly, I asked about their origin, curious as to what kind of kingdom could forge such beings. Semyaza then spoke of his homeland, a kingdom called Ashtara, nestled beneath endless skies and among the stars lit by El Elyor. For ages they had watched our world, maintaining silence and distance. His words stunned me. I had never heard of the stars, nor of worlds separated by immeasurable abysses. My mind could not grasp the magnitude of what he revealed, and looking up at the sky, I searched for answers in vain. Amidst the assembled crowd, Azazel noticed a calm, composed maiden, whose humble beauty stood out clearly. Her name was Saphira, and her eyes could perceive what was hidden from others. When her name was spoken in the presence of the visitors, Saphira felt her face flush, but she held Azazel's gaze, drawn by the imposing presence of the being before her. As their eyes locked, the world around Saphira seemed to fade away. Strange visions flashed through her mind. Endless skies full of light, landscapes painted with colors she had never known, colossal structures drifting in the vast expanse, all wrapped in the pain of a distant memory. Methuselah watched with growing unease, feeling his heart pound with a dark, cold anxiety. Though he too was curious about Semyaza and Azazel, he intuited that the union of two such distinct peoples would bring more sorrow than blessing. I, Enoch, had dismissed my initial warnings, now convinced that these beings would bring bright and prosperous days to my people. Yet the union between those who descended from the heavens and the children of men broke the ancient laws of El-Elyor. From that act, a seed sprouted whose fruit was still unknown. Awed by their splendor and wisdom, few realized that a door had been opened to something that should never have existed. Time continued to flow among the children of the earth. The visitors, once seen with astonishment, had become part of the daily landscape. Life began to change slowly through the teachings of Semyaza and Azazel, although each guided us in very different ways. Semyaza revealed knowledge intended to enrich our lives, always careful not to disrupt the world's balance. One clear night by the river, he showed Methuselah and me how to read the stars, explaining their movements and how to measure time and seasons. He taught us that every light in the sky followed a path traced by El-Elyor, and by understanding those paths, our people would sow better, eat better, and live better. Methuselah, amazed by these lessons, expressed concern that in gaining such wisdom, we might lose the humility that kept us grounded. But Semyaza, calm and steady, promised that his intention was to bring balance and prosperity, never to alter our essence or bring any suffering. Meanwhile, Azazel began teaching select men the art of metalworking for weapons, showing them how to master fire to forge spears, swords, and other powerful tools. He declared these weapons would ensure our strength and dominance, guaranteeing that other tribes would respect and fear us. In the privacy of her home, Sapphira tried to share her concerns with Azazel. She could clearly see what others could not. She sensed that the weapons would draw the attention of neighboring villages, inevitably leading to conflict and war. However, Azazel insisted that power brought security and respect, and that concealing knowledge would only bring about our ruin. Sapphira then asked if a higher being could truly descend among humanity without disturbing the balance of their world. That question stirred a shadow of doubt within Azazel. Time, which Semyaza had taught us to measure by the light of the stars, began to pass at a new, more tense rhythm. Sapphira's prophecies quickly came true. As our men began to carry the gleaming swords Azazel had taught them to forge, neighboring tribes took notice. Initially, envy turned to awe, but then quickly morphed into bitter fear. Finally, that fear ignited the flame of conflict the young woman had anticipated. I attempted to mediate, using the wisdom Semyaza had shared to try and bring peace. But I realized a painful truth. The knowledge of weapons had sown a kind of nature in our men, one that wisdom could not easily uproot. The balance was completely broken. While the chaos of petty wars began to gnaw at the Earth's peace, another event occurred that would shape the destiny of humanity forever. From the union of the Watchers and our beautiful women, anomalous children began to be born. These children were not like regular humans. They possessed a strange appearance, mixing the ethereal beauty of their fathers with the sturdiness of their mothers. They grew rapidly, surpassing the height of the tallest men in the village. People began to call them Nephilim, but we simply called them the giants. In the early days, they ran among us with the innocence of children, yet with the strength of adults. However, as they continued to grow, their appetite and wild nature also increased exponentially. They needed more than a simple village could provide. Their hunger could not be satisfied by normal harvests or small herds. Nama, with her sensitivity, was the first to perceive the frightening change. She saw the way the giants looked at the animals, no longer as creatures with whom to share the world, but as prey. Then, she noticed their lack of reverence for the ancient trees and the river. It seemed they did not carry the same respect for the sanctity of life that we maintained. The giants began to deplete the earth. They felled ancient trees just for pleasure. They muddied the river. and they hunted every creature until the land around us became barren and desolate. Finally, their hunger became insatiable. Sapphira sought me out with tears in her eyes, recounting terrifying whispers. The giants had begun to look at the weak and the elderly of the village with a completely different gaze. It was then that I knew the final boundary had been crossed. The direct intervention of the Watchers had not only changed our knowledge, it had created a race whose very existence was destructive to life. Their union, initially driven by fascination and the intention to bring enlightenment, had become the seed of destruction. One evening, a tremor more powerful than all the others shook the valley. It was no longer a sigh or a warning. It was a roar of wrath from the earth itself. I had one last clear vision. I saw the water, endless, surging from the abyss and pouring down from the heavens, erasing every trace of this disturbance. I saw El Elyor's indignation directed not at humanity, but at the anachronism that had broken his divine order. In that vision, I saw a vessel, built not from the knowledge of the Watchers, but from humility and obedience, the Ark of Noah, my descendant. Immediately after, Semyaza and Azazel appeared before me one last time. Their faces no longer held their ethereal confidence, but deep remorse. Semyaza, his voice broken, confessed their mistake. They had been blinded by love and pity, and instead of watching, they had interfered and transformed a world they had no right to change. I looked at them, not with judgment, but with profound sorrow. I understood that their descent, the enlightenment of the stars and the metals, was ultimately only the prelude to a great judgment. I, Enoch, had witnessed the beginning of the world and the birth of great things, and now I had seen its end. I saw the heavens open and the lights descend, and I saw the door close, leaving behind a world about to be cleansed by water. A deep sleep was coming upon humanity, a great stillness before a new world was reborn. Night fell, bringing a star-lit stillness. In a hidden corner of the village, under the dim light of the galaxy, Nama and Semyaza whispered together. Nama's voice carried a deep judgment, an intuition that Semyaza, who came from the sky, had never suspected in a human. But their whispers were not of romance. They were the echoes of a growing doubt. The teachings of Azazel, Semyaza's brother, had begun to sow unease. Semyaza spoke up, his voice heavy with anxiety. He wondered if it was too soon for humans to wield such great power. Were they ready to hold the fire that could consume their own world? That tension was not solely theirs. That very night, the sky responded to the unspoken questions. A light began to descend, not the light of the sun or the moon, but a clear testament. The Creator had turned his gaze towards us. The entire village suddenly awoke. Captivated by the villagers' astonishment, I watched the descending figure without blinking. My breath caught in my chest. The person bore a resemblance to Semyaza and Azazel, but one thing made them stand out: a silent strength, an authority that needed no words to assert itself. They stood there like a pillar of celestial law. Their name was Uriel. They looked directly at me and delivered a clear warning. The laws of heaven had been broken. Those who had descended from the eternal realm had crossed a forbidden boundary. Uriel urged me to alert the villagers to the dark days that were fast approaching. Astonished and confused, I asked how they knew my name and where they came from. Confusion weighed heavily on my heart, because I had sincerely believed that the arrival of these sky visitors was a great blessing for us. We had seen knowledge, seen the light, seen the future. How could it be a curse? Uriel declared with absolute authority that they were the guardian of the boundaries set by El Elyor. The knowledge we now possessed had been stolen without divine permission. And then they gave the final warning, cold and unyielding. 3 new beings were growing in the wombs of our women, beings that were not fully human, and whose birth would usher in days of painful trial. At that very moment, from the shadows, Semyaza and Azazel emerged. They walked slowly, their eyes filled with caution. On their faces, I clearly saw a mixture of reverence and fear, for before them stood Uriel, the watchman, who acted under El Elyor's command among the stars and the worlds. Semyaza spoke first, his tone placating but strained. He insisted that his intention had never been to cause harm, but only to bring light to the children of men. Uriel looked at them with a stern, unforgiving gaze. They reminded them that they had broken the ultimate law, to mingle with earthly beings and create something that should never have existed. They declared that their actions had put the order established by El Elyor in grave jeopardy. Azazel responded with fierce conviction, stating that they had bestowed knowledge so that humanity would no longer grope in the dark, but could instead take hold of their own destiny. A dangerous pride. Uriel, however, countered that they had crossed a line that El Elyor had drawn with wisdom. Knowledge given without proper maturity was poison disguised as a blessing. The day would come when those very gifts would turn against us, and against themselves. The warning had been delivered, the catastrophe was foretold, and the seed of destruction had been sown in the growing fetuses. Everything had changed greatly since the Watchers descended upon Mount Hermon. Our village had grown accustomed to the presence of the Star Children, seeing them as teachers and protectors. Their presence had become the new normal. However, no one could imagine the true scope of this union between 2 worlds. From the bond between Semyaza and Nama, the twins Damal and Arhan were born. Meanwhile, Azazel and Saphira had conceived a son named Nimruth. They grew, tall as trees among us, unmistakably distinct. Their stature stirred deep admiration, but simultaneously it caused a sense of unease, a silent shiver in anyone who stared at them too long. Their height defied the laws of the world. Their arms possessed the strength to tear stones from the ground. However, wisdom did not dwell within them. They only vaguely sensed their strength was extraordinary, never realizing that this very thing would make them more frightening than lovable. And then, the inevitable happened. One day, Nimruth sought to demonstrate his power to the village children. In that display, not only did a hut collapse, it was the collapse of the illusion of control. In that instant, all eyes were opened. Fear sank deep as everyone understood that we were living alongside creatures capable of destroying us all with ease. Methuselah, his eyes heavy with doubt, warned everyone of the unnatural nature of what was happening. He said that since the sons of heaven had arrived, we had ignored the clear signs. Their children possessed a power completely beyond human control. I tried to reassure my neighbors, explaining that there was no malice in the hearts of these giants, but only a strength they did not yet understand, something they still needed to learn to master. Despite my defenses, I could not extinguish the growing unease in my own soul. I chose to retreat into the nearby forest, seeking the stillness and clarity I could only find among the tall, silent trunks. In that secluded corner of the forest, enveloped by the tall and sturdy trees, I closed my eyes and let the whispers of nature soothe me, as if the earth itself was trying to calm my anxious soul. With every breath, I felt the physical world around me slowly dissolve. Something inside me crossed the boundaries of time, touching a reality that no words could fully express. Suddenly, I was struck by a violent, overwhelming vision. Before me stretched a raging ocean, its waters endlessly swallowing the land. My heart pounded with agony as I saw a colossal wave rise on the horizon, rushing straight toward our village. A cry caught in my throat, and just as the wave was about to crash down on everything I loved, I opened my eyes. The stillness of the forest was a complete contrast to the vision. I sensed it was not a mere dream, but a clear warning. I quickly began my journey back to the village, knowing I had to alert my people and confront the truth that had been revealed to me. An unimaginable storm was approaching. The earth itself felt the weight of those days. What began as a promise of peace had turned into a constant, almost unbearable tension. I had believed that our village would flourish with the knowledge gifted by Semyaza and Azazel, but instead of abundance, famine came. Nimruth, Arhan, and Damel had grown to gigantic sizes. They were distinctly different from any human, and satisfying their boundless hunger became increasingly difficult. They devoured our harvests relentlessly, draining weeks of labor in a single day. Our granaries emptied quickly, and soon there wasn't even enough food for the children. In that moment of despair, Methuselah reminded me of the words of the messenger Uriel, the warning that the sons of heaven had brought calamity and destruction. A chill ran down my spine. Uriel's powerful yet firm voice had left an indelible mark. Just then, a sudden vision struck me with a strong force. I clearly saw a massive wooden vessel floating upon dark, turbulent waters beneath a sky roaring with ancient thunder. Mountains and cities were swallowed by the abyss, and I understood that it was not just a vessel, but the final echo of a dying world. I confessed to my son that Uriel's words weighed heavily on my soul. I knew the final days were near, though I could not yet fathom the depth of the abyss, but I was certain that the worst was still awaiting its moment. The situation worsened when the giants, no longer satisfied with destroying our fields, began to encroach upon neighboring lands. The villagers there started to blame us for bringing forth such monsters. One night, gathered around the central fire, a silent crowd stared at me with angry and uneasy eyes. The spears they carried were not as daunting as that gaze, heavy with reproach and accusation. Their leader demanded justice, blaming us for the devastation caused by our giants. I tried to calm them, explaining that the young ones did not yet understand the strength they carried, and that only time could teach them balance and restraint. But the crowd erupted in fury and marched toward Azazel's dwelling. They found him calm under the faint moonlight, indifferent to the chaos he had unleashed. Semyaza, desperate, begged for patience and understanding, pleading with them not to lose control. Azazel, however, responded with pride and defiance, reminding them of his true nature, beings who had watched over this world long before its first breath. Just then, the clouds began to swirl, and the air suddenly grew cold. The sky thickened as if the very light had been suspended. Then I heard the first thunder distinctly, a deep moan rising from the bowels of the earth. The storm arrived not like a wave, but like a crushing blow. From my distant corner, I watched the tragedy with a knot in my chest. I saw the lightning strike with an unnatural slowness, casting a terrifying light on the faces of the men, who, seized by fear, scattered without purpose. What I witnessed that night filled me with both awe and dread. I knew that the bond between humans and the Star Children had begun to shatter forever. A few days later, under the cold light of the pale moon, Azazel gathered a group of villagers near the edge of the forest. His face reflected a dangerous mix of restrained anger and cold determination, as he prepared a strange material that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. Azazel told the villagers that he had seen their suffering, and offered a gift to protect them forever. One of them stared mesmerized as Azazel mixed black earth, sticky resin, and a pale yellow powder that gave off a foul sulfur odor. He explained that this gift came from the deep heart of the earth itself, warning that no human power could extinguish this fire once it was unleashed upon their enemies. Soon, the formula was used in lamps to light the paths and homes. It burned longer than the fire they had known before, though they had not yet seen its true power. For a brief time, the village regained some of its lost confidence, believing itself protected by Azazel's gift. But the peace was fleeting. A few weeks later, the giants Nimruth, Arhan, and Damal returned to the neighboring village, wreaking havoc with savage abandon. This time, the villagers were prepared and engaged them in battle. In the fierce clash, Nimruth was struck in the leg by a spear and fell to the ground with a roar of pain and shock. Although the giants survived, they returned wounded and humiliated. Nimruth, blinded by rage and wounded pride, demanded vengeance from Azazel. Azazel, once again, gathered the villagers in the clearing in the forest, promising to reveal unimaginable wonders if they protected his honor. The villagers, seduced by the promise of absolute safety and power, secretly prepared dozens of containers filled with the flammable material. Without warning, a rain of fiery projectiles fell upon the neighboring village, turning it into an uncontrollable firestorm. Every desperate attempt to extinguish the flames failed. These fires defied the natural laws, and the very suffering of men seemed to fuel the blaze. From afar, Semeyaza and I watched the tragedy in absolute silence. The gifts that had once been given had become a curse, and in that instant, I recalled Uriel's stern warning: power without wisdom is a doorway to suffering. Azazel, proud and unrepentant, accused humans of acting according to their own violent and destructive nature. It was then that I saw clearly that the darkness in his heart had no limit. I chose to turn my back on the horror and return to the forest, the sacred place where I had received my first visions. There, slowly and with determination, I looked up at the heavens, wondering how such wise beings could bring about this terrible destruction. Perhaps, I thought with horror, Azazel was right. Perhaps the true root of the catastrophe lay in man himself. With a trembling voice, I begged El Elyor for an answer, desperate to know if this was the inevitable fate of my people. In that instant, the world seemed to stop. I clearly recalled Uriel's voice, assuring me that El Elyor never ignored what had happened. Then, among the stars Semeyaza had taught us to observe, a brilliant point of light appeared, its illumination growing as it slowly descended, with a solemnity that crushed the soul. And Uriel arrived. Their footsteps were bright shadows on the ground. Their deep eyes seemed to have witnessed the first spark of creation and the last darkness of fallen worlds. They walked straight toward me, declaring with absolute authority that the time had come for El Elyor to restore the lost order. Uriel's words were like cool water on burning earth. I believed that if El Elyor had turned his gaze toward us, there might still be hope for our children. But what followed shattered my spirit completely. Uriel revealed that our people were corrupted, and El Elyor had commanded a great flood to cleanse the world. All would perish, even the innocent who had never partaken in these evils. My heart broke at that judgment. I could not understand why all had to pay for the sins of a few. But before the flood, it was necessary to erase the existence of those who should never have been born, whose presence violated the most ancient law that sustained the balance of the countless worlds watched from afar. I did not answer. I sensed Uriel was not like the other heavenly visitors. Their presence radiated a divine purity, as if their words emanated from the primordial light that birthed all things. Immediately after, Uriel walked to the center of our village. Around them, the villagers stood in reverent silence, staring at the celestial entity who advanced with authority. Uriel warned Semyaza of the gravity of the transgressions caused by him and his heavenly brother. Semyaza, broken, was too late to admit the horror caused by his choices. He had realized the extent of the damage and, weighted down by guilt, confessed that he could not hand over his children to destruction. Semyaza, once a powerful angel, stood there, his soul heavy. He had secretly helped Nimruth, Arhan, and Damal escape, a desperate act, a faint flicker of hope that perhaps one day those half-breed children would find salvation. Uriel, the fire angel and keeper of the balance, listened in silence. For a brief moment, a similar pain crossed their mind, reminiscent of an ancient memory, a moment of fracture that had once occurred on another distant world. Finally, Uriel's voice resonated, gentle yet firm. Although El-Elyor might consider his repentance, his children would never escape divine justice. But Azazel was different. He spoke with unyielding arrogance and defiance, rejecting all authority and accusing humans of being unworthy, destructive beings. Uriel replied with severity. The darkness of mankind should have unfolded on its own, not been provoked by celestial intervention. Suddenly, from the infinite heights, gentle, shimmering rays of light descended. They slowly took form before our eyes, revealing themselves to be the Orhalim, the celestial guardians, whose mission was to monitor and preserve all life across the worlds. Uriel ordered them to hunt down the children of Azazel and Semyaza. They ensured that no earthly force could conceal them. Finally, with unwavering authority, Uriel declared that Azazel would also not escape divine judgment. His hour was set, and the punishment would not be delayed. From afar, I felt the weight and gravity of those words. Our world was about to face a judgment that no one could stop. For a long time, Uriel strode among men with a clear and unbreakable mission. They had to find the children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the giants, the Orhalim, endowed with the wisdom of Ashtara, the great temple of light, glided across the skies in search of the giants. Their movement was like strokes of brilliant light, reminding us that every choice holds the power to create beauty or unleash chaos. They traversed the pristine landscapes, crafted by the Creator, places that had never been touched by human hands, where nature spoke its own language. Amidst those endless lands, Damal and Arhan wandered aimlessly, exhausted by the long escape. Semyaza had warned them before leaving. Uriel would never rest until they were found. As the days passed, their strength faded until they could resist no more. Even the strongest spirit will falter when hope has fled, and the heart finds no refuge. Uriel felt the signal from one of the Orhalim and gently ascended to the heights. They moved in silence until they reached the giant's location at dawn. Damal and Arhan, aware of the power of the approaching entity, accepted their fate with resignation. From the thicket of the forest, Nimruth watched them with a cold determination. Sensing he still had a chance, he turned and ran toward the coast, leaving his cousins without a second glance. Though clumsy and heavy, an obstinate light burned within him, clinging desperately to life. With a voice like thunder, Uriel declared to Damal and Arhan that their existence was contrary to the eternal law and would not be tolerated in the sight of the Creator. Without further warning, they looked up at the sky. A supernatural storm began to form over the heads of the giants, darkening the sky and filling the air with raw, primal energy. Lightning bolts continuously struck the twins, their massive figures glowing with each intense surge of energy. Their cries of pain echoed through the valley as their bodies slowly disintegrated. After one final blinding flash, only blue smoke and drifting ash remained. In the distance, Nimroth reached the coast and desperately pushed a wooden boat. He had secretly built this vessel for months, anticipating this tragic end. With one last look at the horizon, he climbed aboard and set sail south, disappearing into the ocean mist. At our village, I sat by the river in meditation. My aged body was burdened with worry, and my spirit was tired from all the conflict and loss I had witnessed. Uriel came to me, calmly revealing that the fate of the giants had been sealed. Damel and Arhan would never again sow ruin or pain upon the earth, and Nimruth had gone toward barren lands where no strength could endure. I also knew that Semeyaza would return with them to Ashtara, while Azazel would face the harvest of all he had sown. I asked how they maintained the balance among countless worlds and stars. They explained that for El Elyor, the infinite was nothing other than himself, present in all, capable of sustaining every balance. The sky turned leaden, heavy with a storm raging fiercely within the clouds. On the peak of a desolate mountain, Azazel waited, carrying his arrogance and defiance for the inevitable appearance of Uriel. Soon after, amidst the lightning that tore the sky in fury, the orb of light descended from above. Uriel had enforced order among the Watchers in many worlds, but they had never faced a blasphemy so great, giving physical form to forbidden creatures, half star, half clay. Azazel, with sarcasm and challenge permeating his words, greeted Uriel with arrogant remarks. He declared that nothing could change what had happened, nor erase the marks carved into the hearts of men. Uriel's gaze reflected both disappointment and resolve, forged by their training in the temples of Ashtara, where the natural balance of worlds was revered. Uriel spoke sternly of the suffering Azazel had caused, reminding him of the noble purpose bestowed by El Elyor, a purpose that required humility and vigilance. Azazel attempted to justify himself, claiming that humans needed his guidance, insisting that he only revealed their true malevolent spirit. But Uriel reminded him that only El Elyor was the true creator, and their task had always been to guard and observe. Azazel stepped forward, intending to demonstrate his power, but suddenly he was frozen in place, unable to move even an arm. Confusion and fear spread across his face. Uriel, steady and solemn, declared that their mission was to restore the fractured balance, and Azazel had become a danger to everything born under the Creator's gaze. As Uriel looked up to the heavens, the clouds responded with a violent storm of blinding lightning. Azazel's body remained motionless, trapped by an invisible force that stripped him of his will. The rage in his eyes slowly gave way to despair. From the clouds, brilliant beams of pure energy poured down, wrapping Azazel in solid chains of light. Each chain was an unbreakable bond, tied to the divine judgment. Azazel struggled in vain as he was slowly pulled down into the rocky ground, sinking inevitably, becoming a prisoner of those celestial constraints. And silence reigned. The wind subsided little by little. The clouds began to dissipate, and the faint light of the sun once again filtered through the mountain peak, now transformed into an eternal prison. Uriel stood still for a moment, staring at the stone tomb they themselves had sealed. A flash of sadness crossed their face, fully aware of the painful duty they had just completed. Since Azazel was buried beneath the mountains, it seemed that even nature held its breath, waiting for what was to come. By the riverbank, I waited patiently, aware that my path was coming to an end. My tired eyes carried the serenity that comes from understanding, having witnessed truths capable of breaking even the most resilient hearts. Uriel appeared with their usual solemnity and calmness, telling me that El Elyor had watched every step I had taken, and that the time had come for me to leave this world. Initially, I resisted the thought of abandoning my people. I longed to face whatever calamity might come alongside them. I could not understand why humans were not given the chance to correct their mistakes. Uriel, with compassionate severity, explained that bestowing power before its due time was certain to lead to desolation, a deviation from the path intended by the Creator. The human soul had been corrupted beyond redemption. When I asked what fate awaited me among the celestial beings, Uriel assured me that I would see things no human eye had ever gazed upon, accessing truths that only they could reach. They ensured that my legacy would survive through my bloodline, especially in the family of Noah, who would be chosen to survive the great flood. A life raft would be built in secret, and when El Elyor opened the gates of heaven, Noah's family would sail toward a new dawn. Their words penetrated my soul, stirring silent tears of sadness for what I was leaving behind and hope for what was to come. I accepted my fate with humility, ready to discover the wonders that heaven would reveal to me. Not far from there, on a small hill overlooking the valley, Semyaza was gazing at the scene under the moonlight. Beside him, Nama carried the heavy sorrow of separation. Semyaza recognized the damage caused by his presence, and aware that he must face the consequences, he said his farewells with tenderness and melancholy. He promised to forever carry the memory of the moments shared under the starry sky in his dreams. Nama stood still, feeling her soul break as Semyaza slowly vanished into the glowing orb of light. She understood that eternity is just an illusion for those who have never loved. Everything of value burns quickly and fades in silence. Meanwhile, Uriel's orb was waiting near the forest. I slowly walked toward it, stepping onto a ramp that seemed forged from solid light. As I watched the village shrink below, a deep peace settled in my spirit. I embraced my destiny without fear, silently wondering what new wonders and truths would be unveiled. The orb carried me through a vast expanse of darkness and brilliance, moving away from my world until it was just a tiny blue dot. With my eyes wide in absolute astonishment, I contemplated a panorama that no human had ever seen before. First, there appeared before me colossal columns of fire, immense forms of blazing flame rising from unfathomable abysses, spiraling upward like living creatures supporting unseen worlds. Further ahead, I saw stars that seemed to sing, their voices resonating in perfect harmony. Each star vibrated with its own light, tinting the darkness with silver, gold, and deep blue tones. Moments later, I witnessed immense torrents of light exploding with untold power. Like living creatures forged from pure fire, these currents stretched between celestial bodies. In that moment, I understood that everything I had known was but a spark within an infinite sky, teeming with presences, powers, and unseen wonders. After traversing an area that seemed to be made of silver winds, I approached a vast world surrounded by 3 golden orbs, glowing like a radiant jewel suspended in the void. As I moved toward that new destiny, I realized I was witnessing the absolute grandeur of El Elyor's design, and I knew with certainty that my soul would never be the same again. Uriel's orb pierced the atmosphere of Ashtara, and I saw a realm whose beauty transcended all understanding. We descended near a colossal structure built atop a brilliant mountain where even the stone itself flowed with light. Guided by Uriel, I walked through a great hall whose walls glittered like pure crystal. Radiant pillars supported the infinite ceiling, reflecting light shimmering with unimaginable colors. In the center, upon an altar carved from unknown precious stones, was El Elyor. His appearance defied all human language, an entity of radiant crystalline essence, enveloped in a fire that never consumed. As I tried to focus my eyes on his face, the sheer power of the light and the flame erased all detail. I could only feel an infinite energy breathing life, wisdom, and compassion. I understood that this vision was only a form that El Elyor permitted our limited eyes to see. He was invisible and infinite, beyond even the reach of the watchers. His voice then resonated deep within me, reminding me that in a corrupted land, I had walked with justice and compassion. He revealed that the day the waters would cleanse the world was coming, and only the bloodline I had guided could restart the story of humanity. Until that time, I would remain here, learning the hidden truths so that my testimony could bring light to the survivors when the appointed hour came. Let these words be kept by those who walk after us. Do not give life to what you cannot understand, for it will not know how to love you, but it will surely know how to judge you. We live upon a tapestry woven from censored history, a tapestry where every thread that composes it has been carefully selected, removing patterns that do not conform to the official narrative. But what if I told you that, just beneath that familiar groundwork, exist colossal pieces of a forgotten story? Pieces powerful enough to shake the very foundations of human history as we know it. This is not a new story. It is a repetition. It's like a pattern that appears over and over again across cultures, throughout eras, and always ends with a curious disappearance. Let's start with the giants. The most recent, most frequent story echoes from the late 19th to the early 20th century, mainly across the United States. The story is always the same. An amateur archaeologist, or a serendipitous farmer, is digging, often in a sacred Native American burial mound. And then, he finds them. Giant skeletons. Imagine the moment. He stands in the dirt, looking down at bone fragments larger than anything he has ever seen in a human being. A cold sense of awe runs down his spine. A discovery that challenges everything he was taught. He calls the Smithsonian, and this is where the story shifts into a familiar and darker phase. The Smithsonian, America's greatest institution of history and science, sends people. They investigate. They collect those giant skeletons. They take them away. And then they disappear. Missing. No record. No exhibit. More than 1,000 reports of such excavations across the U.S., yet the physical evidence has dissolved into thin air, sunken deep into secret archives. So, is the Smithsonian covering up evidence of giants? This is a highly contentious question, but it's essential to understand. The conspiracy theory isn't just about the giants. It is about a massive cover-up of a lot of things. The Smithsonian is an icon, a repository of human knowledge where you can spend days immersing yourself in history. But like the Holy See of the Vatican, which also has its own secrets, the Smithsonian has a dark side forged in ideology from its very inception. The first director of the Smithsonian, John Wesley Powell, was a man who respected the indigenous cultures. He saw their intelligence and ingenuity. But then a shift in power occurred. A new regime rose, one that carried a terrifying view. Native Americans were an inferior species. They were just specimens. They put Native American body parts on display. And when incredible archaeological discoveries emerged, Like the Serpent Mound in Ohio, or sites across the nation, the Smithsonian had a canned answer. Native Americans are too savage. They could never have built these structures. So they introduced the conclusion. There must have been another, more advanced race here before. A race that they implicitly suggested was not Native American. They called it isolationism, a malicious shift from the earlier diffusionism, which acknowledged global cultural interaction. Isolationism asserted Mississippians couldn't have communicated with the Mayans or the Incas. They were too savage. Yeah, this is ludicrous. It's like saying Carthage had nothing to do with Rome. The evidence suggests the opposite. The largest, most advanced ancient cities in the world existed right here in America. Let's talk about Cahokia. This was a Mississippian culture city, larger than London, larger than Paris at the time. A massive advanced civilization that was deliberately obfuscated and ignored. The Smithsonian was locked into this worldview, and any evidence of a more advanced civilization, a different historical event that did not fit the official narrative, was sidelined, censored. We see this repeating itself in the pseudo-archaeology circles. If you do not follow the orthodox narrative, you are ridiculed, and your reputation is destroyed. Think of Graham Hancock's creation. His series was called The Most Dangerous on Netflix. Why? Because it suggests a forgotten advanced civilization. The insidious implication applied was, if it was advanced, it must have been white. An angry, erroneous distortion of a fascinating work of research. And what's remarkable is the legal exemption granted to the Smithsonian. A law was passed requiring all museums to repatriate items of cultural value, especially burial artifacts, to Native American tribes, a necessary, just act. But within the very lines of that law, there is an exemption. The Smithsonian is exempt. They do not have to answer. They do not have to comply. They are granted strange privileges, allowing them to keep what they want to keep. So, when we return to Lovelock Cave, or the 1,000 reports of giant bones, the question remains, what is the truth? The mainstream media says it is hoaxes, fabricated stories to make money. But there are too many coincidences. Over 1,000 newspaper reports. That is hard to dismiss entirely. There is one story of giants that is particularly noteworthy because it intersects with so many indigenous cultures, the red-haired giants at Lovelock Cave. In the Mississippi Valley, Native American tribes have legends of cannibalistic giants. They say the tribes banded together, driving these giants west, eventually to the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. According to the legend, the tribes surrounded the cave, where the giants were hiding. They lit a fire, sealed the entrance, and cremated everyone inside. Years later, an archaeologist entered the cave, and what was found was astonishing. Size 15 sandals, equivalent to US size 29, colossal clothing, and giant skulls and bones with bright red hair. These items were sent to the Smithsonian, and then they vanished. A famous female tribal leader later showed off strands of red hair woven into her traditional attire. She said it was the hair of the Lovelock giants. Where did she get it? I am not saying everything is true, but I want to know. What is the chain of custody of the evidence? We deserve to know. We deserve to know why gigantic coffins, which indigenous cultures never used, were discovered and sent to the Smithsonian, where they were recorded as received, yet vanished without a trace. And when pressed, what is their answer? We found them, but they are in a warehouse that has an asbestos problem. It will take about 10 years to get into it. A convenient excuse for a buried mystery. The story of the giants is not just an archaeological mystery. a museum-related conspiracy theory. It is a golden thread running through the entire tapestry of human history, originating in the most ancient and sacred texts we know. Aside from the newspaper reports of giant bones, much of our belief in giants comes from biblical texts. In the canonical Bible, we only get a glimpse of them. The noun Nephilim is mentioned only once, vaguely, before the Great Flood. But if we look at a more extensive version of the Bible, one that has been excluded from the mainstream, the story comes alive with astonishing detail. We are talking about the Book of Enoch. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch is an incredible tale. It occurred around the 18th century when an explorer searching for the source of the Nile traveled to Ethiopia. There he met an Ethiopian Jewish community that had lived in isolation for millennia. These tradition keepers took him to their church, and there he saw a colossal book. He asked, "What is that?" They replied, "That is the Bible." Not the Bible we are familiar with its 66-something books, like the King James Version. This Bible had over 100 books, and within it were excised titles, books that seemed to have been erased from the collective memory of humanity, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants. While our Genesis begins with, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." This expanded Bible contained everything that happened before. These documents reveal astonishing details about figures we only know glimpses of: Moses, Methuselah, and Enoch, who had a bloodline connection spanning 10 to 12 generations from Adam. The story of the giants in the Book of Enoch follows a pattern that those familiar with ancient mythology will immediately recognize. It aligns perfectly with the Sumerian Anunnaki narrative. The story goes that there were sky gods who sent a group called the Watchers down to Earth. Their mission was to shepherd and guide humanity, teaching men necessary skills like animal husbandry and agriculture. But these Watchers fell. They were captivated and seduced by human women. And the transgression happened. The Watchers, perhaps angels, interbred with human women. The product of this unholy union was the Nephilim. The Nephilim were not just tall people. They were giants. In some texts, they are described as being up to 100 meters, 350 feet, tall. They were aggressive, violent, and cannibalistic. They were the unholy progeny of the celestial and the human. Whether they were the descendants of angels or demons, the important thing is that they came down to earth with good intentions but became corrupted. They brought chaos to the world. The chaos and devastation of these giants were so great that the Lord God decided to put an end to it. A do-over was necessary, and that is when the Great Flood appears, wiping everything out. The Book of Enoch expands in detail upon this event, providing the reason, the context, and the direct divine intervention. The Book of Enoch has one of the most shocking details. Enoch is taken to heaven to speak to God. According to Orthodox theology, no mortal should be able to set foot in heaven and return. But Enoch did. He was carried up by the archangel Uriel on a chariot of fire. When Enoch describes heaven, he is not talking about clouds and harps. He speaks of walls covered in emerald stones that blink with light. He sees tall beings of light doing their work. He describes a roof, a shiny ceiling. He sees how the wind is created, and every lake and river on earth. If you read the Book of Enoch with modern eyes, his description sounds like he is on a spaceship. He is on a UFO, unidentified flying object. He is taken across the cosmos. He describes the solar system and says the Earth revolves around the sun in 364 days, knowledge that, according to official history, humanity should not have possessed at that time. After this cosmic journey, Enoch is given a mission to bring a warning message from God down to the Nephilim giants and the Watchers. If you do not mend your ways, a catastrophe will befall you. But they ignored the command. And then, the wrath of the great flood arrived. Only one person was chosen to survive: Noah, Enoch's grandson. That is where the story of Noah's Ark begins, a narrative that dovetails almost perfectly with the flood and cosmic catastrophe myths from the Anunnaki to Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Book of Enoch, later found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirms that these stories were widely circulated and considered canonical. It shows that there were forces that wanted us to stick within the confines of the official narrative, and wanted to remove details that were too weird, such as a mortal's trip to heaven, or the gigantic violent origins of pre-humanity. From buried giant skeletons to forgotten biblical texts, we see a clear pattern, a story of recurring catastrophe and concealed truths. However, there is another book, a much more modern document, that caught the attention of one of the most powerful agencies in the world, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. That book has a name that seems innocent, even endearing: The Story of Adam and Eve. This book is not about the first two figures in the Garden of Eden, but a 278-page manuscript written in 1966 by Dr. Chan Thomas. And the reason for its notoriety is the strange story surrounding it. This manuscript was classified top secret by the CIA. They redacted 200 pages. Only about 50 or 60 pages were left, and half of those were blank. The CIA admitted the document was sanitized. What reason could a top intelligence agency have for being interested in a book about Adam and Eve? Because this book described the end of the world as we know it. Dr. Thomas, an engineer working for McDonnell Douglas, was not talking about nuclear war or an asteroid. He spoke of a cyclical natural catastrophe, pole shift. According to Thomas, this is a recurring event, caused by something happening to the Earth's inner core. Our electromagnetic field is disrupted, and when that happens, the magnetic, and even the geographic, poles shift. He described a terrifying shift, a 90-degree angle. Imagine, the South Pole moves to the equator, and the equator plunges south. It is not a slow change. It is a violent flip, and when the planet shifts, our atmosphere continues to spin west to east at the old velocity. Thomas described the result: gigantic walls of water, wind, and debris tearing everything apart. Great cities are crushed to dust. He wrote, "New York, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles are just memories. New York sinks to the bottom of the ocean." Meanwhile, the South Pole, now at the equator, becomes a tropical, lush land. The theory put forward was the CIA wanted to suppress this book because it would cause global chaos and panic. However, the story of this mysterious book also has its own secrets. Upon deeper investigation, the truth about this book began to unravel. It was not a 278-page book that was later butchered. It was always a shorter manuscript, and it was never truly classified top secret. The author, Dr. Chan Thomas, full name Chanty Powers Thomas, was an engineer working on confidential projects involving anti-gravity and missile systems. He was brilliant, but also quite eccentric. What is likely to have happened is, because he worked on top secret projects, the CIA assigned an officer to keep track of him. In his CIA file, one finds not only the book, but also a People magazine, a shopping list, and other random documents. They did not classify the book. They were merely gathering intelligence on an eccentric engineer working in sensitive fields. This story, though partially debunked, still offers an important lesson: information manipulation. It shows how cover-up narratives can grow, capturing our attention. But more importantly, It reinforces the pattern we have seen from the Smithsonian. If something challenges the dominant historical narrative, it will be distorted, concealed, or dismissed. From vanished giant bones to the Book of Enoch excluded from the Bible, and now a story of a terrifying pole shift labeled secret. There is always a force that wants us to remain within the confines of what they want us to know. What we do not see in the Smithsonian's archives or in the redacted pages could be the key to understanding not only the past of the giants, but the catastrophic future that may be awaiting us if this cycle of disaster is truly real. We have traversed the recorded myths, the forgotten physical evidence, and the censored documents. All of them paint a picture of giants, the Nephilim, and cyclical catastrophes that have shaped the Earth's history. But throughout this narrative, one theme always stands out: organized cover-up and the role of knowledge-preserving institutions, like the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is constantly embroiled in strange conspiracies. One of them involves the Acambaro figurines, or the Ica stones, thousands of artifacts allegedly dating from 2,500 to 3,500 years ago. What makes these artifacts so stunningly controversial is they depict humans with diverse races such as Asian, African, riding or interacting with dinosaurs. These artifacts were sent to the Smithsonian, and what was their response? Fakes. They are only 30 years old. However, other independent labs confirmed the dating. No, these are actually very old. But then, conveniently, the labs that confirmed the artifact's antiquity were later discredited. Their techniques were declared not modern. And that is where the story of these figurines ends, labeled a hoax and pushed into the dark corner of history. It's a pattern. If the evidence does not fit the accepted historical timeline, if dinosaurs were not supposed to coexist with humans 3,000 years ago, then the evidence must be denied. I believe the Smithsonian is holding a massive treasure trove of secrets. It is estimated they have close to 1 billion artifacts that the public is not allowed to see. I do not want to speculate, but I want to know what they are. Sure, 99% of the reports of giant bones might be hoaxes. Maybe 0.5% are misidentified mammoth bones. But what happened in Lovelock Cave, where we have evidence of red hair woven into indigenous traditional attire, where large-sized sandals were found, attested by local legends? I am not claiming those were Nephilim giants, but I want to know, where is that physical evidence now? That is when we must return to the core question: who is allowed to tell the history story? The story of the giants, the Book of Enoch, and the Earth's pole shift ultimately leads us to one conclusion. These patterns are not coincidental. The repetition of the flood myth across hundreds of cultures, the consistency in the description of giants in Western mythology, Native American folklore, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And now, the CIA's interest in a book describing cyclical catastrophe. This suggests a collective human memory of horrific events, times when the world was wiped out and had to start over. And there are forces, scientific orthodoxy, preservation institutions, that have decided it is in our best interest to keep these memories in the background. They want us to believe the world is built on a linear, controllable timeline. They want us to stay in our lane. But what we find in the Book of Enoch, or in the reports of vanished giant coffins, is a reminder that history may be far more complex and terrifying than what is hung on the walls of any museum. We may never see a public inventory of the Smithsonian. We may never touch a verified Nephilim giant bone fragment. But we can do one thing: ask questions. We can look at these patterns and recognize that behind every concealed story, behind every dismissed artifact, is a piece of a vast, brilliant and dangerous history, a history waiting to be awakened from its eternal slumber. The Mediterranean. This vast sea, spanning nearly 2.5 million square kilometers, is not just a body of water. It is a cradle that nurtured the most powerful empires and gave birth to the advanced Western civilization we know today. For thousands of years, its shores have carved the indelible mark of ancient civilizations, from writing and splendid architectural arts to philosophical milestones. But there is another mark, a more silent and stranger story that few have paid attention to. It is the story of the giants. That's right. The legend of the giants appears in every corner of the Mediterranean. The Roman historian Dio Cassius once wrote that giants had once walked the land before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Today, we view it as mythology, but at that time, for the ancients, giants were considered real. But who were they? What did they look like? And what were they here for? Did humankind truly witness gigantic beings walking the earth in ancient times, as Cassius recorded? Welcome to the latest video from Primeval Universe, In Search of the Giants' Footprints. The Mediterranean coastal region is indeed extremely significant to the history of ancient civilization. Its mild climate and fertile land gave rise to some of the greatest civilizations on Earth. We have Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, Phoenicia, Greece, and also Rome. Their development far surpassed what we commonly imagine. Art, philosophy, science, architecture, all were crucial foundations for later Western civilization. Their advancement was truly astonishing. Mesopotamian astronomers calculated the 12-month calendar. Phoenician sailors pioneered celestial navigation, and Greek philosophers established the principles of a democratic government. But throughout this Mediterranean, the story of the giants is quite familiar. There are many different versions telling of large creatures. They are neither gods nor men, yet they play an indispensable role in the oldest stories. It is recounted that the giants fought with the gods residing on Mount Olympus for control of the heavens. In fact, it's not just the Mediterranean. Everywhere, every culture around the world features the presence of giants. Tribes in the American Southwest tell of a red-haired race of giants, similar to what the Celts in Europe recount. Even in India, the earliest Sanskrit texts record that the Buddha was a blue-skinned giant, standing 2.7 meters tall. And on Easter Island, local legends say the colossal Moai stone statues were erected by the giants themselves. But for those who believe in their existence, the Mediterranean remains the place where the most incredible stories are found. And moreover, their details may suggest that this place was the destination of gigantic beings of extraterrestrial origin. Indeed, we have many stories from ancient Greece, Rome, or Sumer that mention giants as part of history. So, the idea that at some point in time, a race of giants once walked the land is entirely plausible. And at that point, we must ask ourselves, who were they? If giants once lived among humans, as the ancient texts record, did they leave any evidence to prove their presence? It is believed that the answer can be found by examining an extremely famous gigantic race mentioned in Greek mythology since the 7th century BC, the Cyclopes. The poet Hesiod wrote about the Cyclopes, a group of one-eyed giants, responsible for building extraordinary stone structures around the world. They were incredibly talented architects, craftsmen, and sculptors. They could forge objects, make armor, weapons, and many other things. In other words, the Cyclopes belonged to a supernatural race, playing an extremely important role for the Mediterranean coastal lands. Many ancient structures are believed to have been built by these giants. One of them is the structure we are looking at, the Lion Gate at Mycenae. Why is this the case? Is there anything special about this structure that preserves the imprint of the Cyclops giants? The reason people say this is because the architecture of the Lion Gate is called Cyclopean masonry. Cyclopean is a term used to refer to a building technique, stacking large stone blocks together without any kind of mortar. From this technique, over time, a series of structures across many different civilizations were born: defensive walls, temples, tombs, and also fortresses. Today, any ancient structure with a construction style that stacks large stones on top of each other to create a polygonal shape is identified as using the Cyclopean technique. So, did the Cyclops giants truly build the architectural structures in the Mediterranean, enduring the terrible destruction of time to stand firm until today? Personally, I believe the answer is yes. And the number of incredible structures built by the giants is not limited to just a few, but amounts to thousands of different constructions. Right in the center of the Mediterranean Sea, south of Sicily, Italy, lies the Maltese archipelago, one of the smallest countries in the world. But this tiny nation boasts 7 colossal stone structures. Among them are some of the largest monolithic stones in the world. The stone temples of Malta predate the pyramids of Egypt by more than 1,000 years. They are massive stone architectural works that are older than anywhere else on Earth. And what's remarkable is that these types of stone architectures are very likely to have originated from Malta itself. Today, these stone architectural works are considered by archaeologists to be among the greatest creations of ancient craftsmen on Earth. Let's look here. This is the structure called Ggantija. Gantija is the second oldest stone temple in the world and one of the most important mysterious archaeological sites that, to this day, scientists have not been able to decipher the ancient purpose of its construction. It was once the oldest temple in the world before Göbekli Tepe was discovered. Built between approximately 3,600 and 3000 BC, the Gantija temple consists of 2 separate temples and a third, unfinished one. The south temple was built in 3600 BC and the north temple in 3000 BC. These 2 temples were excavated in 1826, but in-depth studies were only conducted in the late 1920s. It seems that the ancient builders had already created the facade of the third temple, but for some unknown reason, they abandoned the work. The Gantija temple was mainly built of stone, with many similarities to other famous temple complexes on the island of Malta. Large stone pillars, stone walls, and small statues inside believed to be symbols of fertility. Each temple has 5 apse-like chambers connected to a central corridor, leading to the inner sanctuary. The south temple is much wider and more elaborately carved. Although built many years apart, both temples share an incredibly similar architectural style. Externally, the Gantija complex is surrounded by a large boundary wall. This is the most prominent feature of the temple. This wall was built with advanced techniques, featuring megaliths over 5 meters high and weighing more than 10 tons. Inside, there are also smaller stones believed to have been used as rollers, replacing the specialized wheels for transporting the colossal stone blocks during the temple's construction. However, this is only one interpretation, because even if they managed to transport the huge stones to the construction site, it remains unexplained how the builders of that time could stack such large blocks on top of each other. To this day, the local residents still believe that the Gantija temple was built by giants. The name Gantija in Maltese also means belonging to the giants. So, can we suspect that this place was once the dwelling of a gigantic race of beings thousands of years ago? And if so, were they born on Earth, or did they come from somewhere else in the universe? We might find the answer as we continue to another ancient stone structure in Malta, a structure with a close and specific connection to the cosmos. That is the Menajdra complex. This complex consists of stone structures arranged based on the shape of a clover leaf, a symbol of good luck. Among the three temples in the Mnajdra complex, the South Temple appears to have been specifically designed to function as a solar calendar. Mainstream archaeologists say that the oldest temple here was built around 3600 BC by the same builders who constructed Gantija. And of course, the builders we are talking about here are understood to be giants. But in 1992, Professor Paul Michael of the University of Malta published a shocking book claiming that Mnajdra dated back much further than the announced figure. He suggests it was built over 10,000 years BC, based on astronomical research into the Earth's tilt. If what the professor analyzed in his book is correct, then the temple predates the first known civilization on Earth. So how could a sophisticated stone structure, with an incredible astronomical alignment, have been built on an isolated island even before human civilization was formed? Many believe that the building knowledge was passed to the Maltese people by the giants, a race that did not belong to the Earth. To better understand what we are talking about, I think we need more traces, something clearer from the giants perhaps, still located on the Maltese archipelago, but this time in the southwest, within the area of Misra Gar il-Kbir. This area is home to some of the most baffling traces in the world, a complex network of deep grooves etched into the rock, simply called cart ruts by the native inhabitants. The cart ruts in Malta are about 1.2 meters wide. They are equally spaced as if prearranged. Some of them extend for tens of meters, while others stretch up to a kilometer. The imprints on the rock are called cart ruts based on their shape. They resemble the tracks of some kind of primitive cart pulled by horses or people passing over the ground. However, we cannot know what they actually are, as there are no records or clues to verify this. Many of them intertwine so complexly that the area is compared to Clapham Junction, London's famous train station. The author of the book, Cart Ruts of Malta, Deciphering a Mystery, studied these traces for decades. In his publication released in 2010, we see how their formation is explained. The first hypothesis put forward was, these tracks were formed by drag sleds, a means often used by Native Americans. They use this to transport household items such as tents and pots from place to place. However, the problem here is, when moving, the distance between these sleds is much wider than the cart ruts we are referring to. Thus, this hypothesis was completely rejected, and perhaps most people do not pay much attention to the fact that many of the cart ruts connect directly to the Mediterranean Sea. This is as if they are going straight down to the deep seabed. How strange. Are we looking at a deliberately constructed work that we cannot understand? The cart ruts leading to the sea extend for kilometers underwater and connect to neighboring islands. It is clear that the sea level has risen significantly compared to thousands of years ago. During the Earth's last glacial period on record, sea level was up to 90 meters lower. Thus, during the time between 10,000 and 15,000 years ago, many islands in this archipelago may have been a single large island. And that was also the home of the people who used some strange means to transport stone everywhere around the island. This means that Professor Paul Michael's discovery is true. The Mnajdra Temple was indeed built 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. However, there is one more thing that causes confusion for researchers. That is, in reality, these grooves do not only appear in Malta. Similar cart ruts are found everywhere, from Tunisia to Sicily. Therefore, they seem to be related to some mysterious race that dominated a large area around the Mediterranean. And if we accept the possibility that these colossal transport roads were created by the Cyclopes giants, the superhuman craftsmen, the question is, how did they do it? The first piece of evidence might come from archaeological discoveries. In 1904, archaeologists discovered a stone tomb in Filitosa, Corsica. This tomb was built in the Cyclopean style, dating back to approximately 3,500 BC. It has a simple architecture, but scattered around it are large stone monuments with carved human faces. For years, archaeologists believed that these statues were simply memorials, until a French archaeologist named Roger Grosjean proposed an unusual idea. He believed that these statues were not of ordinary Corsican people, but that they were the symbols of the giants. Grosjean described these statues as images of fearsome giants. Imagine rough blocks of stone hewn into the shape of tall warriors with detailed carved armor, swords, and helmets. Some statues even have sharp carvings running along the chest, giving the impression of heavy metal armor. More importantly, some statues have only one eye carved in the center of the face. One eye. This is the Cyclopes of Greek mythology. The similarity in shape and characteristic is undeniable. This suggests that the Cyclopes were not merely products of imagination. They may have physically existed and been depicted through these sculptures. If these one-eyed warriors were real, what was their purpose in the Mediterranean? Let's return to the construction works. The ancient Greeks believed that the Cyclopean walls surrounding cities like Mycenae and Tiryns were built during the golden age of the Cyclopes. These colossal stone walls were built with stones weighing from 5 to 15 tons, fitted together with incredible precision. The later Greeks, with their technology, were unable to replicate these structures. They could only attribute it to a gigantic race with superhuman strength. Today, some historians explain that the term Cyclopean simply refers to the size of the blocks, not the builders. But if they were just ordinary builders, how could they move and lift such heavy stones to a height of tens of meters? If the Cyclopean walls and the megalithic temples in Malta, weighing tens of tons, were built even before humans had the necessary tools and techniques, then perhaps we need to consider another possibility. The giants used a kind of technology unknown to us. If they were not builders using ropes and human strength, then who were they? Let us return to the extraterrestrial origin hypothesis. This theory suggests that the Cyclopes giants were essentially extraterrestrial beings, or those with hybridized DNA, possessing superior knowledge and technology. Recall the detail about the Mnajdra temple complex in Malta, which may date back up to 12,000 years and was arranged to function as a solar calendar based on the Earth's tilt. Only those with complex astronomical knowledge and the ability to calculate extremely precise geology could create such a structure. Could this be evidence of a civilization passed down to the Maltese people? If we look at the mysterious cart ruts stretching for kilometers under the seabed, connecting the islands, we see that they are too large and too deep to have been created by primitive ox carts or horse-drawn carriages. They required a type of vehicle of gigantic size and extremely heavy weight to be able to imprint so deeply on the hard limestone ground. A transport vehicle pulled by giants, or a kind of super-heavy motorized vehicle of an advanced race. These grooves, with their uniform spacing of 1.2 meters, indicate a standardization in technique, a sign of organization and civilization on a large scale. The fact that similar grooves appear in Tunisia and Sicily reinforces the idea that we are talking about a race that dominated a large area of the Mediterranean during a forgotten historical period. A gigantic race that walked between lands using super-heavy transport carriages to build the great megalithic structures, even before the official history of humankind began. The sculptural evidence from Filitosa gives us a concrete glimpse. Giant, one-eyed warriors equipped with armor and weapons. They are not just myth. They were a warrior, artisan race that left an undeniable material legacy. So, were the giants the first architects of Mediterranean civilization? They built the strongest fortresses, the most ancient temples, and even the most complex astronomical structures, using the knowledge and technology they brought. And if the giants left the Earth after completing their mission, or were destroyed in a mythological battle with the Olympian gods, they left behind a trail of technological traces disguised under the guise of mythology and legends. When you lie down, close your eyes, and let your mind drift through the great megalithic structures of the Mediterranean. Think about the Cyclopes. Think about Gantija standing firm for thousands of years. Think about the mysterious stone tracks leading down to the deep seabed. Is it possible that the stories we call myths are just the distorted memories of a golden age? An age when real giants walked the earth, building the foundations for our world? The mystery of the giants in the Mediterranean remains, challenging our perception of history. And perhaps the answer lies not in history books, but right under the colossal stones that have been silent for 10,000 years. Relax, breathe deeply, and let your dreams take you back to the time when giants still walked the earth. Look at the deep parallel grooves running across the surface of the small island of Malta. They are called the cart ruts. They are the remains of a complex transport system, yet they are dated back over 12,000 years. More than just a road, they are a big question mark. Could these be the tracks left by the builders of the colossal stone temples, or in other words, individuals with superhuman strength? To search for more concrete clues to this mysterious question, perhaps we should turn our gaze to another island. Located 186 kilometers west of the Italian peninsula is Sardinia. This stunning island is a contrasting tapestry of rugged ravines, arid meadows, and pristine white sand beaches. It is also home to mysterious ancient stone structures, similar in scale and construction technique to what we see in Malta, despite being over 600 kilometers apart. Sardinia is most famous for its abundance of structures called nuraga. Imagine, they are conical towers, but with the top part truncated to form a flat surface. These towers were built from massive basalt stones, stacked perfectly on top of each other. Archaeologists have found nearly 7,000 nuraga in Sardinia, but the actual number, according to many experts, could be up to 20,000 or even more. What perplexes scientists is how these structures were built. A colossal volume of material could not simply sprout wings and gather there. According to the orthodox hypothesis, these structures belong to an indigenous civilization that emerged about 4,000 years ago and then mysteriously vanished around 200 AD. But the strangest part of the found structures are the stone tombs, called the Tombs of the Giants. Nearly 800 tombs bear this haunting name. Why giants? The answer is simple. They are much larger than necessary. Curious people have measured them themselves, and the results show that one could comfortably fit someone about 4 meters tall inside. The problem is, we have never found a body or a skeleton. Could they truly have once contained the bodies of giants? And if Sardinia was the homeland of a gigantic race, who were they? In 2014, the National Archaeological Museum of Sardinia announced an exhibition of several colossal stone statues called the Giants of Monte Prama. Found since 1974, countless excavations have taken place. 40 stone statues, about 2.5 meters tall, have been reconstructed from disjointed parts. And here is what's remarkable: their faces. If not mentioned beforehand, many people would mistake this face for the image of the robot C-3PO from the Star Wars series. But more importantly, researchers believe they were modeled after the shape of beings who once coexisted with the local inhabitants. What were our ancestors trying to describe through these sculptures? If they truly are imitations of the race of giants who once lived on the island, does that strange appearance reveal anything about them? More than 300 stone monuments are scattered across the islands, which may provide us with more information. They are called menhir, a large stone slab planted vertically into the ground. Unlike menhirs elsewhere, the stones in Sardinia are often carved with very abstract human figures. They look as if someone is descending from the heavens. Some researchers speculate that they represent beings who descended from the sky to impart knowledge. The idea of birdmen cults has existed worldwide, with many carvings of winged humanoids, even appearing before the descriptions of biblical angels. So if the colossal statues in Sardinia depict extraterrestrial giants, do the menhirs also reveal the same? The idea of extraterrestrial giants is further reinforced by the ancient Sumerian people. This civilization existed at the same time as the menhirs in Sardinia and the records of the Anunnaki giants. Anunnaki are the figures of creative gods in ancient Sumerian and Babylonian culture. Our ancestors thought their appearance was magical and divine. This detail further strengthens the belief in the extraterrestrial origin of the giants across the Mediterranean. And if giants truly once walked here, is there any chance we can find their remaining footprints? It is time for us to venture beyond the borders of the Mediterranean to shed light on the truth about the giants in the missing part of history. In recent years, the veil covering history has begun to lift, revealing astonishing physical evidence. Giant footprints have been found in many places around the world, from Spain to Sri Lanka, from Paraguay to Texas, USA. Scientists have traveled to these places to see and study this phenomenon firsthand. What they discovered and verified truly astonished everyone. The appearance of those colossal feet is a direct challenge to those who are skeptical about the existence of giants and prehistoric civilizations. But among all, there is one trace that carries the weight of time and legend more than any other. In 1912, in the town of Mpuluzi, South Africa, a hunter named Stoffel Coetzee accidentally stepped on a giant footprint deeply etched into the rock. Local people call it by a respectful and haunting name: the footprint of God. This footprint is about 1.2 meters long, and astonishingly, it is very similar to a human footprint. Scientists dated the rock, and the results yielded numbers that shook all our historical understanding. The estimated age of this footprint ranges from 200 million to 3 billion years. Let that number sink into your mind. 3 billion years. The footprint is imprinted in a felsic granite rock, also known as facholith granite. This extremely hard type of granite has undergone many cooling and shaping processes over millions, even billions of years. Therefore, there is absolutely no possibility that this colossal footprint is man-made, created by modern humans. If this truly is a footprint left by a giant, then the height of this individual must have been at least 7 meters. Although there are disputes about the exact age, the traces on the rock surface clearly show that tectonic activities have caused the rock surface to tilt upwards. Some skeptics say this is entirely a random coincidence, just a rock naturally eroded. But most people reject this view. They argue that the probability of a natural rock mass being eroded into an anatomical shape identical to a human foot is extremely low. Those who believe in the existence of giants have linked this colossal footprint to the skeletal remains found in many other places. In 1964, in a valley in southern Ecuador, the family of Catholic priest Carlos Vaca found a gigantic skeleton. After being identified by many experts, one was a heel bone and one was a tibia. Both belonged to an individual estimated to be about 7.6 meters tall. Unfortunately, the bones were too old to extract DNA for further study. In the late 1950s, Many colossal bone fossils were also discovered in the valleys of Turkey. The investigation showed that they were very similar to human bones, but the proportions were astonishingly large. One of the found femurs was up to 120 centimeters long. Based on this ratio, this person was about 5 meters tall. Calling them giants is entirely reasonable. In 1976, information about the discovery of giant human skeletons in Romania began to spread widely. These skeletons, found during excavations in the Carpathian Mountains, were said to be up to 10 meters in length. They possessed extraordinary anatomical features, including large leg bones, elongated skulls, and incredibly robust bone structures. These findings raised fascinating questions about the existence of a giant human race in antiquity, challenging conventional beliefs about human physiology and rewriting our understanding of ancient civilizations. However, these discoveries have become subjects of great controversy in the field of archaeology. Skeptics argue that the records of colossal remains may be the result of misinterpretation, exaggeration, or even hoaxes. They question the lack of widespread documentation, scientific analysis, and peer-reviewed publications supporting these claims. They point out that, physiologically, it is almost impossible for a human individual to reach a height of 10 meters. However, proponents argue that the existence of giants is supported by numerous ancient texts, myths, and oral traditions found in various cultures worldwide. They suggest that the suppression of this evidence may stem from a desire to maintain the established history. Interestingly, the giant skeletons allegedly found in Romania are also linked to Hyperborea, a mythical land mentioned in ancient texts as an advanced civilization inhabited by giants. These puzzling pieces contribute to the growing body of evidence, challenging orthodox historical narratives, forcing us to seek a more multi-dimensional view. To further uncover the truth behind these allegedly gigantic skeletons, rigorous scientific investigation is needed. An interdisciplinary approach, involving collaboration between archaeologists, geneticists, and anthropologists, is crucial to unravel this mystery. However, it seems that in the past, this evidence was handled differently. Let's rewind to May 1912. In the Delavan Mound area, Wisconsin, USA, archaeologists from Beloit College excavated 18 skeletons. These skeletons had oversized bodies and skulls, unlike any human race ever found. These were not the Native Americans we are familiar with. These were anatomical structures that challenged all accepted evolutionary theories. Many people believe that the photos taken of these findings are fakes, but behind the controversies is a larger story, a story of systematic cover-up. According to some information, the U.S. Supreme Court once had to order the Smithsonian Institution to release secret documents from the 1990s. These documents, it is claimed, revealed that the Smithsonian had destroyed thousands of giant skeletons to protect the institution's centuries-old evolutionary perspective. Orthodox scholars argue that the ancestors of Americans were people who came from Asia via the Bering Land Bridge. However, the existence of giant human remains, individuals who may have lived here long before that, makes this view completely shaky. Admitting the existence of a prehistoric race of superior size would force us to rewrite all history textbooks. And for many institutions, protecting the established history is the top priority, despite the evidence. However, the most influential evidence, which silenced and drew skepticism from the scientific community, comes from another corner of the world, Egypt. In 2012, a Swiss businessman named Gregor Spuri published a shocking set of photos on the German website Bild.de. He claimed to have seen a giant mummified finger in Egypt in the 1980s. Spuri recounted his trip in 1988. On the last day, he met an old man who claimed to be a tomb raider, 100 kilometers northeast of Cairo. The old man asked Spuri to pay $300 to see a special artifact. That artifact was a finger placed in an oval package, giving off a musty smell. After opening it, he saw the finger was up to 38 centimeters long. The nail was damaged. The skin was torn but still visible. Along with the finger, the old man also showed 2 documents from the 1960s, an X-ray and a certification letter that a doctor confirmed to be a human finger. The strange tomb raider insisted on not selling the giant's finger. He told Gregor Spurry that the items his family stole from the tomb were all marketable except for this finger. Ultimately, Spurry only managed to take a few photos, including one where a 15-centimeter long banknote was placed next to the finger for size comparison, becoming the most powerful visual evidence. Later, when he returned to Egypt to search, the old man and the giant's finger had vanished without a trace. The traces of giants, whether they are the colossal stone structures in Sardinia, the million-year-old fossil footprints in South Africa, or a mummified body part in Egypt, form a chain of evidence that cannot be entirely dismissed. We are living in a world riddled with mysteries, with a lot of information deliberately concealed to protect the status quo, to protect what we still believe is the truth about ourselves and the Earth. New perceptions do not necessarily fit our ingrained notions. We have embarked on a journey spanning continents and millions of years of history. From the colossal Nuraghi towers in the Mediterranean, believed to be the resting place of individuals 4 meters tall, to the skeletal remains up to 10 meters tall found in the soil of Romania. All these pieces, though dismissed by mainstream academia, create a consistent picture: the existence of a prehistoric race of extraordinary size. These findings are not just archaeological anomalies. They are discoveries that profoundly challenge our fundamental beliefs about evolution and the origin of mankind. If giants once walked this earth, then the entire historical timeline, we are taught, must be rewritten. In the modern world, access to information is always accompanied by filtering and censorship. The accusation that major institutions like the Smithsonian Institution destroyed thousands of giant skeletons to protect a scientific view that has existed for hundreds of years is a powerful wake-up call. It shows that sometimes the truth is hidden not because it is dangerous, but because it shakes the stability of established knowledge. We cannot forget the suggestion about the origin of the giants. Were they the Anunnaki of Sumerian legend, the creator gods who descended from the sky? Or are they simply an evolutionary branch that has been excised from historical records? The existence of the Monte Prama statues with their strange, robot-like faces, or the menhirs depicting figures descending from above, all lead us to the same crossroads. There is a larger secret beyond our worldview. Faced with these new, highly tangible discoveries, what should we do? The most important thing is to expand our worldview. Let go of prejudices and judgment based solely on the limited reason of modern man. We need to accept the possibility that the history of the earth is much deeper, more complex, and more miraculous than what we are taught. The true history may be hiding in myths, in silent stone blocks, and in forgotten ruins beneath the ground. Do you think giants exist in this world? And if so, have they truly disappeared, or are they just waiting for the right moment to return to reveal the whole story of our origins? Let those questions gently lead you to sleep. Today's video concludes here. Goodbye, and see you in the upcoming new journeys, where we will continue to explore the most profound mysteries of human history. Wishing you a peaceful night and deep dreams.